Hello to everyone. We're talking about fall is the time for spring color. You need to plant it now, which is such a problem sometimes because we forget about it and you don't think about bulbs until the spring when they're all starting to pop up again. It's like, oh, I want to plant some of those, but it's too late. So fall bulbs are perfect packages for easy planting because inside each little bulb is the potential to create a flowering plant next spring. They have everything in them. They're ready to go. All they need are the right conditions. Now bulbs, I always like to give a little background. I love to give a little history. So you're going to get the full show here today. Bulbs are actually classified as geophytes, and that just means that those are plants that shelter the resting bud in the soil when environmental conditions are not favorable. So they're under the soil. The structure also serves to store energy and water and that sort of thing so that when the right conditions come along for the plant to grow, then it's ready to go. And so that is what you call a bulb, a geophyte. Now, a lot of times we will use the term bulb collectively for all geophytes or a lot of them. But as you see, all bulbs are geophytes, but not all geophytes are bulbs. And here we have some examples of them. You have your true bulbs that are like your daffodil, even lilies, but then we also have corms, tubers, tuberous roots, and rhizome. Now today I will be talking about some of the geophytes. We're actually going to be talking about true bulbs, and I think there's 2 corms thrown in there that I'll be talking about with you. And then this is just showing an example of what they are, like irises. The bearded iris are actually rhizomes. The one to the right on top of the rhizomes that looks like just little strings with things poking out of it, that is actually a lily of the valley. It's considered a rhizome. Of course, we know tubers. We have our potato, but then you also have tuberous roots, and I believe that bottom one is daylily. Now, daylily are more of a summer type, what you would consider geophyte, or some people call them bulbs. But we will be addressing our real bulbs, true bulbs over here. And true bulbs are tunicate, and most of what I think of, the daffodils, tulips, that sort of thing, they are what you would consider tunicate. And that just means that they have an outer sheath on them that sort of protects the bulb, or a tunic. And then you also have non-tunicate, and that is more like, I think those are some lilies that maybe you see there. And that means they just don't have that little tunic on that protects them. Now for history, bulbs are actually pretty fascinating. The origin of bulbs is lost in antiquity. They've been around forever. Now in 300 BC, that's before Christ, it was mentioned in Greek writings, and they were mentioning tulips in Greek writings. Now you can see the map there, but bulbs originate from somewhere in the Mediterranean. Of course, the people in Greece like to say they came from Greece, and then more in the Turkey, that sort of thing. They say, no, they came from here, but actually, you know, so long ago, and they're so close together, you can see that they had seaways there that they could trade and barter and that sort of thing. It's hard to say. But the Turkish people, bulbs were a big part. And then there you see a Greek statue, and he's got his little bouquet of tulips for his love there. Also, Julius Caesar, when he was invading Great Britain, which was probably as early as 55 BC, the Roman soldiers actually brought daffodil bulbs with them because they believed that if you are familiar with daffodils, when you break the stem, there's like a little gel in there. They thought that was a good thing to apply to any kind of skin problems, or that the sap actually had healing powers for other problems, maybe if you were hurt in battle or something. But actually it's been found that the gel in a daffodil can be an irritant to your skin. So I wouldn't recommend putting it on your face or your hands. Hyacinths, they came to Europe from Turkey, and you can see they were introduced, I think, in 1573. And by the 1700s, hyacinths were all over the place in Europe. And then even crocuses, as you can see, they came from France to England. And then from there, they were brought to the United States by settlers. So bulbs, you can see, have just been around the world and started in the Mediterranean. Now, I found this fascinating. Tulip history, I mean, tulips were such a big deal that between 1634 and 1637, they actually had a craze in Holland called tulip mania. Now, you know, we think of Dutch bulbs as being originating in Holland, but no, they were actually an import there as well. However, in Holland, they actually took it and ran with it. And they had a mosaic type tulip that, I mean, they were selling these bulbs, a single bulb, for something like $880. And so it was really part of the commerce. And they even had the market to collapse, and fortunes were lost in this when they learned how to graft, I think they said, one stem onto the other with that. But the tulip mania was all about this tulip here. When I see these today in catalogs and things, they're usually called Rembrandt tulips, which I guess harkens back to that time. And this is actually caused by a virus. It's a viral disease, and it causes the variegation or the breaking up of the color patterns within the tulip. So why do we plant these bulbs in the fall? Well, the bulbs must go through a cold period for root development and for growth and for bloom. Now, what we're talking about, the soil temperature needs to be, for the best practices there, between 55 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And nighttime temperatures need to be, say, around 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can see that right now, this past week, we're in prime time if you wanted to plant some bulbs. The best time of the year in Kentucky is September through November and December. It used to be said, oh, you know, September through October, but you can actually get away with November and December. And I can remember some of the very first bulbs I ever planted were muscary or grape hyacinths. And I planted those in December, and I thought, well, you know, I just wasted money on these bulbs, but I went outside and stuck them in the ground. And I can't even say that the ground wasn't partially frozen, but actually they came up the next spring, and that's when I fell in love with bulbs. But bulb roots will begin to grow, so you need to allow about 2 to 3 weeks before the ground freezes. Really, if the ground's frozen solid, that is not the time to plant your bulbs. But 2 to 3 weeks before that, if you get them in the ground, and I mean, how do we know when the ground is going to freeze? And especially here in Kentucky here lately, you just never know what the weather might be at any certain time. But if you can get them in there and they have at least 2 to 3 weeks before it freezes, then they'll go ahead, they will start growing roots. And then when you're looking for bulbs, you want to choose bulbs that are large, comparatively large to what that bulb is, and also firm. When you hold it in your hand and sort of squeeze it, it feels nice and firm. It has a little heft to it when you pick it up. You don't want to see cuts or mold, or you don't want them to be mushy when you squeeze them, because that means that they're rotting, or through a cut there's, you know, diseases and things like that could have gotten into that cut that's going to cause that bulb not to perform as well as you would like. And then bulbs are graded. When you look for them, they're graded by size. And the bigger the bulb, the better the bloom next year. So yes, in this case, size does matter, and the bigger the better. And the way they determine what the size is of a bulb, if they are measuring around the circumference of the bulb, you see there. And also it's measured in centimeters. And, you know, you can get a lot of times, especially online when you go on, I know when I've been buying some bulbs for classes and that sort of thing, I can get something they call landscaper bulbs or landscape bulbs. They are usually smaller and they're cheaper. And why they call them landscape bulbs is that landscapers can take those, especially with tulips, plant them, they'll have a beautiful display next spring. And then what landscapers do a lot of times, especially with tulips, is they will come in and take them up again. So they're not there to, you know, grow for years and years and years. They're just have them there for 1 year of display. But now the homeowner can also cash in on that. And, you know, the first year your blooms and things may not be quite as big as you'd like and the display not be quite as fantastic, but given good care over the years, they will grow into that. A lot of times I will say, just beware. Sometimes you can buy bulbs. You never want to buy bulbs that look extremely tiny, or you pick them up and they sort of feel really lightweight. And if you squeeze them, you know, you can almost squeeze them through. And sometimes you have to watch people because, or companies, I guess, because they will have advertised bulbs, but when you get them, they're really tiny. And that's because they can buy these tiny bulbs from other wholesalers pretty cheap, package them up, and then sell them to you, the homeowner. So you probably want to check the size of your bulb when considering buying your bulbs. Now on the right there, I have given you, made a little chart there for you that will tell you what are the sizes you look for. So you can see with the alliums, the big, large alliums that get between 4 and 5 feet tall, 20 centimeters, you know, all the way down to like, well, anemones and crocus, which are actually corms, you know, they're going to be a lot smaller, 5 centimeters, 9 to 10 centimeters. But this is a good guideline for you if you're sort of new to bulbs or want to purchase some more. You can sort of arm yourself with this information so you know what you're buying when you're out there getting ready to purchase new bulbs. Now for planting, of course, you want to plant in a sunny spot. I will say you want to remember that you can even plant underneath trees sometimes, because remember at that time, your bulbs may start to bloom, and a lot of them start as early, well, maybe February, especially March and that sort of thing. And your trees may not be leaved out quite as much yet. So they will get sunlight underneath those trees. So you can actually plant some bulbs underneath the trees. You just have to think of that time and say, okay, what is the sun doing at this time of year and what is going to affect them? Of course, as with everything we plant, you would like to have a well-drained soil. I would just avoid clay soils. I know a lot of people say, well, you need to amend it and this and that, which bulbs are supposed to be fairly easy and a happy thing to do. So if you've just got extremely clay soils in one spot, just avoid it. It's just not the best spot for it. Go on to somewhere else and find some fairly well-drained soil. Now, also the pH of the soil they grow best from 6 to 7. And the best way to find out your pH is to get gather your soil from your garden that you're planning to plant your bulbs and take it to your extension office and have a soil sample done. Not only will, when you get that information back, it will tell you your pH, but it will also give you recommendations for any kind of amendments or anything else that you might need to add to your soil so that you can grow your bulbs the best you can. Now in planting, you just want to excavate an area, loosen the soil under the bulbs. You want to place your bulbs in a bed or even in holes. A lot of times, you know, you may see, or it used to be, or I thought it used to be, I guess, you know, you want to line them up and have everything very regimented. But what I found, and I think other people have too, is that when you clump your bulbs together and make them look a little more natural, it's really the very best display. But yeah, take the soil out of the area that you're going to plant them, set it to the side, put your bulbs in the soil, and then you want to cover them halfway with the soil, and then water them in. Go get your water bucket or whatever and water them thoroughly and allow that to seep in, and then go back over and cover your bulbs with the remaining soil. You can even add 2 to 3 inches of mulch on top of that if you would like. And then of course, you know, if the fall is dry, you want to make sure that you water as needed. And generally that's like, if we don't get a rain within a week or so, you probably need to go out there and maybe water your bulbs. And remember, they're developing roots until, you know, as long as the soil temperature is right. So that's, you know, into November and December. So you can water them even into November and December. Now, talking about the individual bulbs, sometimes it's really hard to tell which end is up. Now your daffodils and tulips and things like that, it's fairly easy because you want to look at them and try to see a very rough triangle, as you see there. That's a daffodil bulb, but it's sort of in the shape of a triangle. It has the pointy end goes up, and then a little fat bottom with like the roots and things coming out of the bottom, that goes to the bottom. So you place them there. Now the only thing is that with our corms, and like anemone, if you want to take a good look at this one, you can see the anemones and the crocus. Those are actually corms. And anemone, for all the world to me, look like little dried up, well, I guess the best way to say it is maybe little raisins or something, or like a little rabbit has been there. Sometimes they're really wrinkly. They're pretty hard when they're a good corms, but they're wrinkly and they're a little hard to tell. But, you know, do the best you can and place them in the soil. Now, how deep? You come across information that says, you know, tulips are at 6 inches. Daffodils are at 4 inches, you know, and you want to get out your tape measure and everything. However, the best rule of thumb is to think the diameter of your tulip, you know, the diameter that actually determines the grading size of it, also will determine how deep to plant them. So if you follow that you plant them about 2.5 to 3 times the diameter of the bulb, you plant it that deep, then generally you're okay. But with your tulips, and for some reason, I mean, I have tulips and I've planted them, but tulips always seem a little fussy to me. So you really, if you want to plant any of them, especially deep, you want to make sure your tulips are at least 5 to 6 inches deep, because they, you know, the cold can affect them more than some of the other bulbs. Now, for those of you who maybe you're like me and sort of scratch out the place and say, okay, that looks about deep enough, and then you put the soil over. I recently found this information. I mean, it's research-based information, but it was called Smart Flower Bulbs, and that they found that some flower bulbs will actually pull themselves deeper into the ground with their roots. It's almost like, you know, the roots sort of stretch out and then contract, pulling that bulb deeper down if needed. So they are doing that because they want to find the best growing conditions. So I have a feeling that probably some of my bulbs in the past have had to sort of pull that little bulb in some, because there's been sometimes when I'm in a hurry and I know I want to plant some there, they may not have been as deep as they should have. But now we know that, okay, Mother Nature will take care of you, hopefully, to a certain extent. As far as diseases and pests, generally when bulbs are blooming in early spring, you know, there are not a lot of insects and things like that out and about that are going to harm your blooming plants. However, it's the things that maybe can damage your bulbs and that sort of thing. The most common pests of our flowering bulbs are aphids, things like bulb mites, slugs, and snails. And down below that, and I don't know if in this presentation, maybe that's clickable, but I do have a clickable link there. It's a Clemson Extension fact sheet, but they had a great fact sheet on a lot of the insects and pests that would bother your bulbs. So if you're interested in that, you might want to take a good look in that. And then you can always call your county extension agent in your county, and they will help you out as well. Also, fungal diseases, basal rot, smolder, leaf scorch, narcissus leaf scorch, all of these things, those are fungal diseases. And then there's some viral diseases. And remember, in tulip mania, actually the viral disease was a godsend to some people because it sent the tulip market skyrocketing. And what it did was actually break up the color and made them more attractive to some people. But also viral diseases can be detrimental. So you want to be on the lookout for that. So, and then I've mentioned down there below that sometimes the flowers are also affected by breaking or light patches in the petals or dark streaks. That's sort of like that tulip mania thing we have going on there. And at the bottom of all of that information, you can see the Daffodil Society. They have some really good information on fungal and viral diseases and what to do. Now, one of the ways to avoid this, of course, is when you're choosing your bulbs, make sure that you're looking for firm, healthy bulbs. You know, they're not mushy again, and that you have the bulbs that are closer to the right size for planting and producing a good show of flowers. Our next one, this may help some folks. I know earlier we were talking about things that get in your bulbs, but this shows you some of pests or, you know, voles, chipmunks, squirrels, deer, that sort of thing. Some flowering bulbs or some bulbs they don't like, and it's generally just because of the taste, but you can find that daffodils are, alliums, of course alliums are in the onion family, so you can almost see why that would be, that pungent taste maybe, or even smell to some of them. But this is just a listing for you that shows different bulbs. And of course, almost all of the ones that I've mentioned here today, the crocus, daffodils, the great hyacinth or muscari, Dutch iris, alliums and things, you will find that little voles and things like that, and even deer do not like them. Now, it does say resistant, and that means that they will resist eating them unless it gets down to where they're really hungry and there's nothing left, then they may eat your bulbs and that sort of thing. So, you know, don't think, oh, this is totally deer proof. Well, probably, but you just never know. Now, when thinking about how to group your bulbs, as I said, you know, I used to think, well, you plant them in a little straight row and have little borders and that sort of thing. But I've really come to like more the naturalized plantings. And also, I guess for want of a better way, is companion plantings of bulbs and other plants, other perennials. Of course, you can use your flowering bulbs. You can plant them in the same beds that you may have plant annuals later on, or even where you may have some perennials. In that case, if it's a landscape bed that, you know, you may want to change, you know, in a few years, you probably want to mark where you put your bulbs so that when you're out there digging around or digging up a perennial to divide it or something, that you don't, or you take care not to shovel into your bulbs. And I've done this many a times, but you know, you try to take care of that. You can also interplant your bulbs based on the time of when they're flowering and plant heights. There's a wide variety of heights in bulbs that you can have, and also flowering times. So you could actually have something flowering from very early spring, late winter, say in late February, March, depending on where you are, and then even go all the way up into May, possibly July with some of the alliums. So you could have a big succession of color there with some of your bulbs, some bulb choices. Now, everyone, I get this question a lot. You know, what do I do with the bulbs once they've bloomed? Or, you know, they look really ratty and I want to cut them down. They just don't look right, or my husband's ready to mow them down, or whatever, my wife's ready to mow them down. The best practice is to allow the foliage to completely die down in the summer or in the spring once they are spent and finished blooming. You sort of look for foliage that is brownish yellowish, and then you can trim it back. But it is best for you to leave them as long as you can, because they are storing, those leaves are helping to store energy in the bulbs for next year, to create next year's plant. So the longer you can leave them, the better off you are. And I have some examples here, like some people, especially with daffodils and things like that, maybe they try to bind them up and fold them over, and those do look fairly neat, but I have tried that, and it's just a mess sometimes when I get finished with it, and just seems to be a lot of trouble. You know, so I can deal with sort of ratty foliage for just a while and waiting to trim them back. There below that, you'll see some tulips, and this possibly could be like a landscaper or something. They are actually digging those tulips up, but you can see, you know, how yellow and brown the leaves and that thing are. At that time, if the tulip is in your yard and you want to leave it there, then I would say, yeah, that's a good time to cut them off. And I would just get a pair of trimmers, you know, even a pair of garden scissors, something like that, and just trim them back. Looks like in this case, they're actually taking them out. So, you know, and you can do that with some tulips, you know, just buy the cheaper landscaper tulips, plant them, have a big show the spring, and then go in and dig them up and really just discard them. And then next year do the same thing over again. So they treat them more like an annual. And then the other one, that's my yard right there. So you can see it's sort of, you know, they've had their best. So now it's time I can go in there and trim those up. But as I said, you want to let those leaves and stems and things go as long as they can, because they are creating energy for the bulb, the dormant bulb. You can hear this is an example of a tulip. You see that it actually has the flower bud for next year's growth inside that bulb. So of course you want all of that energy to go to, so that your flowering will be the best that it can be. Now the reason flower bulbs go dormant, spring flower bulbs will go dormant, is that they are reacting to seasonal change, such as temperature. You know, it's getting warmer and that sort of thing, and they've fulfilled their life cycle, or even water availability. In droughts and things like that, they will shut off, they will go dormant, and that's just to save that potential little plant in underground until conditions are better. Now the rest of my presentation, I really don't have any that I recommend any more than anyone else, and I think you can go online or look through catalogs and that sort of thing and find any number of bulbs, and there's just such, there's a variety of bulbs, and then even within that species of bulbs, there's just an enormous amount of variety there that you could just go anywhere and find something that you would like. But now these are the alliums, and they have that large bushy little ball at the end of it. They can be as big sometimes as tennis balls, or they can be fairly small. When you go online, usually, or with catalogs and things like that, maybe even at a retail store, sometimes you'll see bulbs that are like a mix. So you may not know that, yeah, this allium is a globe master, mixed with a drumstick or whatever. They're just, it just calls it a mix. So you're getting a mix, and your bulbs may not be identified, but you do know that they're alliums, you know. So anyway, here are some examples of those. Now the anemones, again, the one I think of all the time are the blanda over here in the left-hand corner. And actually this March, it was extremely cold and everything, and we were working remotely. So every morning I would take a little break and walk down the road at my house, and I live way out in the country. And in an old abandoned house, I would watch every day, because there was always some type of new spring bulb or something coming up. And in one of those, under a large oak tree, were some anemones just like this, or I think some people call them windflowers. And they were just really beautiful. And then you also have some of the other different types in different colors. Down at the very bottom there on the right-hand side, you can see a little box and these little brown things that look like sort of larger raisins or whatever. Those are actually the anemone corns. Like I said, they like little shriveled up hard knots. So don't be disappointed when you see those. Crocus is another one of my very favorites, just because they come up so early. And when my kids were little, I would go out and sort of, you know, just to get out of the house and walk around my garden a little bit. And I would find, you know, like a crocus starting to pop in. So I'd go in and tell them, hey guys, I want you to go outside and see what you can find that is purple, you know, as a plant. And they would go out there, and when they were really little, and find the little purple crocuses or the yellow, it popping up, and be excited like I was. And once they got older, it was like, oh mom, whatever. But they do come up, and generally it's always a surprise to me. I always think I should know they'll come up, but when I see them, I'm just surprised. Our next group of bulbs are daffodils. And I don't know if anyone else wondered about this, but you hear so many people, and I would always get the question, well, there's daffodils, and there's narcissus, and there's jonquils, and what's the difference? Well, there's not really a difference. When we go back to botanical naming, the whole genus of these types of flowers are actually called narcissus. The daffodil is what we consider the common name, and a jonquil is actually the species name. So you can see on the kingdom, phylum, class order there, you see you've got a genus, which would be Narcissus, and then the species, which would be Jonquilla. You can see there, Narcissus jonquilla, which is just your everyday type of daffodil. And then it even goes further to describe a cultivar or a variety. So in one of Narcissus incomparabilis aurantis plenus, a long name there. And then when you get down to the very end and it says butter and eggs, that's actually the variety of them. It's a variety name. Now when we look at our daffodils here, the picture that is right above the white daffodil with the little orange around them, the picture right next to that, that is actually the butter and eggs. So you can see that butter and eggs, I guess, is supposed to look like butter, and along with the egg yolk there. Also down here, this is a poet, but you can see that daffodils always just, you know, daffodils aren't just daffodils anymore. You can get them in all kinds of different colors and shapes. You know, we even have, well, like the one at the top there with the really deep orange, almost red, it's called Red Ranger. The one that looks all frizzy and frilly there is actually Rip Van Winkle, you know, so they have all kinds of different names, but because they are daffodils, they are usually pretty easy to grow. Now our Dutch iris, these are also, I've never really used to consider these as part of my bulb family, but they are, and they can be quite pretty. don't confuse them with like the bearded irises that we see that are actually have the, what were they, the rhizomes and that sort of thing. These are Dutch. I think they look more delicate. And I've had some Caesar's brother forever, and they grow and spread very well. And they're beautiful. And I use them as cut flowers, although they don't last very long, I think, once you bring them inside your home. And then also the green strappy foliage, it actually stays green and strappy like that almost all summer long. I still have some in my yard. Now, if you don't mind that, that's okay. For me, sometimes where and they probably need to be divided, but where they've grown out, you know, all you see is this green strap-like foliage there, not much interest. So, you know, depending on what you like to see in your garden, it has its pros and cons. Now, I guess this one has a very special place because this is the one that I tried to plant, or I did plant in like December. And it was really cold that day too when I was out there scratching in the soil. But you can see the grape hyacinths, they're very small. A lot of them, or some of them, may have a nice fragrance to them. But you can see, you know, as far as naturalizing, they make a beautiful color statement in that picture on the left. Those are actually, you know, the purple there are the muscary. And then the others on the right, you can see all of the different types that you can now, you know, different colors, different types, even different combinations of colors. So they can be quite eye-catching. What I have found with these is that they spread quite easily. So if you're naturalizing, that's great. But if you have them in a border, you know, in your lawn, I have noticed that they creep out into the lawn quite a bit sometimes. So, you know, right now, or maybe early in the spring or late spring, you'll still see the little scraggly stems, the green stems that come up with them. So, you know, depending on what you think about your lawn, I know some people really love a nice, clean lawn that looks evenly clipped and, you know, everything. So you do have to watch these. They will travel a little bit. And then we get to our tulips. I think tulips is probably just about everyone's favorite. Everyone loves tulips. And you can see there are many different varieties and types. I always find tulips to be a little bit finicky, and I have had tulips in my garden, and they may do well for 2, 3, 4 seasons, and then they sort of don't do so well anymore. But I think a lot of times maybe it does get a little colder where I live, and they may, you know, that might contribute to it. Those pictures of the pink and the orange and the yellow there on the right, those are actually called, well, Tulipa tardiva, and those are species tulips, which really that just means that those are probably some of the tulips, or their parentage or heritage is some of the tulips that were actually growing wild in the Mediterranean way back many thousands of years ago. So their bulbs tend to be smaller, and also they're a little hardier. I think they grow fairly well, and I have some of those, and they have done pretty well. But those are your tulips. Now, once you get to spring, you know, it's nothing worse than getting to spring and seeing all these beautiful flowers and going to the garden center or whatever and realizing, oh, I should have thought of that in the fall. And then by the next fall, you forget it. But use your spring. If you've ever been in that situation or find yourself in that situation in years to come, use that time to plan. Photograph your spring garden so that when you come to the time in the fall where you're starting maybe to get bulb catalogs and you're out shopping and see bulbs for sale in different places, you can sort of refer to those photographs and say, well, you know, I had a big bare spot there, and I think those would do very well there. Also, it's a really good time to take note of your existing perennials and also the growth and the bloom time of any kind of perennials that you have, and so that you can plan for underplanting strategies with your bulbs. I have tried this a lot, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. As I've told you, when I'm digging up a perennial and you know, put my shovel through a group of daffodil bulbs or whatever. But a lot of times, if you can sort of plan your garden to where you plant your bulbs, and then as they are dying off, maybe some of your perennials are coming up to sort of hide that those sort of shabby looking leaves that you're wanting to stay as, you know, as long as they can. This helps. So in the spring, all is not lost. Use that time to do that. Now, as far as where to find bulbs, right now, you know, if you go to some of our big box stores, maybe even the grocery store, any place, you're going to find probably bags of bulbs. Now, I will say that when you do, if you are in a place where you can actually put your hand on those bulbs or actually peer into the bag and look at them, make sure that, you know, they look good, that they're not cut up, and their tunic is not all fallen off and just in tatters in the bottom of the bag, and you know, they feel nice and firm, and they actually have a little heft to them, you know, they haven't dried up and all that sort of thing. You do have to sort of watch that from time to time, and I've had this happen to me before, you know, see bulbs and think, oh, that's a great price, but when you get them out, you get them home, they don't look too swift, and then they never quite do as well as some of your others. Also, you know, there's plenty of catalogs, and really you have to sort of watch. There are some catalogs, you know, that maybe they do sell only the smallest size bulbs and that sort of thing. So that's where your little list of bulb grading will come in. So you know, well, these tulips should be at least 15 centimeters. And it says I'm getting some tulip bulbs here that are only, you know, this big. They're smaller. That's why they're so cheap. They may, you know, in the long run, it may be better for me to find a better or a larger bulb. So yeah, you can find them online at any of the stores, that sort of, or any big box and garden centers and that sort of thing, place to look. But always, you know, just be armed with the knowledge that you've learned today, and you should be able to tell what's good and from the not so good possibly. But we'll all make mistakes, so, you know, just, that's the way we learn.